I'm going to introduce Ms. Judy Singer. It is my distinct pleasure to introduce Ms. Judy Singer. Ms. Singer is an Australian sociologist recognized for coining the term neurodiversity in her honours thesis at the University of Technology, Sydney in Australia in 1998. The work was based on her experience as the second of the at least 3 generations of the female line of her family somewhere on the autism spectrum. The theoretical framework was provided by the academic social constructionist model of disability. She proposed the term neurodiversity as an addition to the categories of intersectionality and to name the growing social and civil rights movement of neurological minorities spearheaded by the autistic self-efficacy movement. Ms. Singer founded a world-first support group for adults raised by autistic parents online, co-founded Sydney's only independent social club for Asperger's teens, and served as secretary of Sydney's largest Asperger's parent support group. Thank you so much, Julie, for your seminal work to get us started in the field of neurodiversity. Judy will be joined by her friend, Dr. Nancy Doyle, for some parts of the talk, and Dr. Doyle will help with moving the slides from one to the next. And Dr. Doyle will also be our keynote speaker tomorrow morning, and I'll introduce her properly at that time. Without further ado, let's get to Judy's talk. Her keynote presentation is titled, "The Evolution of a Neurodiversity Movement, How Far We Have Come. How Far Can We Go? A Personal Reflection." Please join me in welcoming Ms. Judy Singer.
Okay, thanks very much. So I guess it's time to dive in. And what I'm going to do in the beginning, because I'm quite nervous, I'm going to start reading from my notes, but hopefully I will become a bit more confident. So next slide, please. I want to begin by doing what's standard practice in Australia in conferences of this nature, acknowledgement of country. It's part of a move towards reconciliation with Indigenous people of Australia, and to acknowledge that that our educational institutions acknowledge that Australia was not empty before it was colonised. So I would like to acknowledge the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, the traditional custodians of the land from which I am broadcasting, and I'd like to pay my respects to elders both past and present. Indigenous people have been very generous to us despite the suffering that we inflicted on them in the past. And if I were Indigenous, I would be welcoming you to the Eora country. Talking about elders, I think I'm an elder myself, and I'm just going to read these very carefully prepared spontaneous notes. I'm an elder myself, a few months off my 8th decade on the planet, and this really appeals to me because it's quite a bit of chutzpah, given that I belong to the generation that said never trust anyone over 30. So be prepared for some elderly personal wisdom based on lived experience with a dash of memories of undergraduate sociology and disability studies. It is an honour to be in such expert company. And I must say that I do feel a bit like a fish out of water. Can you blank the slide for now or move on to the next topic? Yeah, just stay there. Yeah. Okay. So I'm absolutely clueless about Brisbane, about business practice, recruitment, human resources, and as for scaling up the workplace, I had no idea what that means. I'm now a bit more enlightened since I listened to the earlier session. when it comes to workplaces, I can't even remember what they were like. It's been so long since I've had one. And so I've always been in a square hole there with the round peg that's my spiky profile. The same goes for my mother and my daughter. And as this is a so anyway, I'm participating in the hope that it's going to be different for other generations that follow us from how it has been for us. Can you go to the next slide, please?
I can, yep.
I think we might have to go back to the previous one because I've got them out of sequence. So this is my mother over there, obviously, and I'm in the middle generation of those. I'm just thinking about how much I want to talk about them at the moment. I think I'll leave that to a further slide. I just wanted you to see the picture of the three of us. But what is significant about that is that I've said in my initial work that I don't just identify as autistic. I actually identify as about 12 different things, and my viewpoints are not necessarily in harmony when I consider myself on the spectrum, what it's like being the daughter of a mother with autism and the mother of a daughter with autism. So it's slightly different perspectives there. We might come to that a bit later. So Nancy, could you go back to the previous slide? So this is going to be, the outline is a theorized personal reflection. I've already said a bit about my family. I'm going to say a bit more about disability studies and how I came up with the word in the first place and what it meant to me. Then in terms of how far we have come, I'll be talking about progress, and while realizing that progress is progress is always a double-sided coin. With every new solution, there are always new problems. I'm going to talk about the evolution of the meaning of neurodiversity from what I thought it should be to what it's now become. I'm going to talk about identity politics as where the movement began and how it's become an industry over the last decade, a burgeoning industry. And for how far we can go, I'm going to be talking about, well, my hopes and my fears in the context of the uncertainty which we are all facing. I mean, in terms of, looking in my crystal ball, I don't think any of us can see past November the 3rd. So on to the next slide. So this is where it began. I'm showing you this slide because that's the first appearance of the concept of neurological diversity. And that is actually a photo of my original moth-eared sort of thesis that I'm still hanging on to, written in 1998. So that's neurological diversity. Going next. Oh, I'm not doing this. Next slide, please. And that's the only time I mention it in my thesis. I should say that my work actually, I think, became known because a shortened version of it was published by, at that time, I think it was Open University Press, in a book called, what's up there? Sorry, Dialectics of, Disability Discourse. And the title of it was, Why Can't You Be Normal for Once in Your Life? And then the subtitle was, From a Problem with No Name to the Emergence of a New Category of Disability. So this the same quote was in that. And so for me, the significance of the autism spectrum lies in its call for an anticipation of a politics of neurodiversity. The neurologically different represent a new addition to the familiar political categories of class, gender, race, and will augment the insights of the social model of disability. I didn't use intersectionality because I hadn't heard of it then. I know it was starting to emerge very much in the United States, but it hadn't come to Australia, but we were already thinking in terms of intersections. What else was I going to say? Never mind. It was, for me, I didn't define it. I thought its meaning was so self-evident that there was nothing to say, and I certainly never thought it would ever go anywhere. I also used it because even at that time, I do want to acknowledge that that all this, I'll say it later as well, but I'm resting on the shoulders of the giants of the autism self-advocacy group, self-advocacy movement. And the reason I came up with neurodiversity was that we were already talking about, we call them autistics and cousins, and that meant ADHD and all the disses. So I could feel that seemed obvious to me that all these other groups would start to follow in the same footsteps, which is and needed an umbrella term for civil rights movement for neurological minorities, and obviously a category to added to intersectionality. And yes, I thought it was obvious, but next slide. Oh, just to underline it, in case you didn't get it the first time, there it is. It's a tool, not a diagnosis. It's I've already said that, a tool for social analysis. And I think it's I don't know if you can see it, but that's a scalpel. It's not a psychomedical concept. It's not, in my opinion, a synonym for, I wouldn't like it to be, a synonym for neurological disorder, which makes it a tool to separate us from them, and it's got normal neurodiverse. Next slide. So, but language evolves. So this is the dialectic, I guess, of its evolution. I thought of it as an analytical tool. Next slide. I'm not biased by any means, am I? I've just kind of turned it into total reverse. And then a new synthesis is formed, and then that becomes criticised. So I have to be comfortable with that. Is that, you're going a bit fast? But it doesn't matter. Or maybe sorry. I just have. That's okay. How far we've come. So I've already said that. You can see, I think other people have already mentioned it before me, so I don't want to keep repeating, but everyone knows Temple Grandin, Jim Sinclair, Donna Williams, Martine Decker. These are the people that I was really aware of at the time. Then Lorna Wing, Tony Atwood, and then the social constructionists, and particularly Professor Leonard Davis, who wrote this wonderful book, which I also use a lot, and I'll show you it. Can you see that?
Bending over backwards.
Disability, Dismodernism, and Other Difficult Positions. And I used his work, that wasn't written then, but I used his book, Enforcing Normalcy, which was hugely influential. And it's I made my dedication a quote from him, and also he is where I got the idea of adding the concept of a neurological ethnicity on the model of the deaf nation, who considered themselves to be a linguistic ethnicity. I don't think they use the word minority, rather than having a disability. And I want and Andrew Jakubowicz, who is professor of at UTS, where I got my degree, and he was my supervisor. He and his partner Helen Mikosha. Helen Mikosha is a feminist leader, also a social worker. I really want to bring people's attention to both of them, because too often we Australians have been sidelined or left out, and both of these people were absolute leaders of the disability rights movement in Australia. Next slide, please.
Okay, done.
Okay. So again, so now I'm moving on to how far we've come. And some people have already discussed this earlier. So obviously we've unraveled, the movement has unraveled the deficit model of neurological difference. We've actually changed cultural perceptions of what it means to be human. That means changing simplistic dichotomies about human minds and human bodies. When I started this, there were only 3 categories of disability, and that was physical, intellectual, and anything else that didn't fit that was, of course, mental illness, which is where you just didn't want to go. But that's exactly where people on the spectrum would probably end up. Often diagnosed with schizophrenia. I think we know all about that. I made sure that I never got anywhere near a psychiatrist in those days. I could see that was danger.
Sorry, Lawrence.
And so changing public and private sector diversity policies very much seems to be happening in the UK, USA, in Australia. There's some awareness. I should say that nobody's ever contacted me in Australia. I'm better known over there, but that's another topic that I might grouse about later. And to me, it means my first piece of writing that I did, which I gave, I think, as a paper, was I think it was words, and it was called Nerds, Oddballs, and I forget the other word, some other unflattering word, no longer fair game. Yeah, in England, definitely not here, but yeah. You can translate this into English if you want. So that was where it began, one of the places where it began for me. I don't know how I'm going for time, but I'm really pleased with that, because what it was based on was the film Greece, where I think it was Eugene it was considered quite normal to bully Eugene, and it was quite normal to bully us. And even today, I mean, we have got, well, you can't really say that about disabled people anymore. And now they know that autistic people are disabled. But what you can do is vilify. In fact, the last people to be vilified by both sides of politics, in our country anyway, although again not as much, is the dole bludgers, the welfare bludgers, the unemployed, as if, and let's face it, if you look at that closely, it'll turn out that most of them are neuro minorities. So in that sense, we've still got a long way to go. And finally, of course, neuro minority pride, identity politics, people reclaiming their identities, and all the rest of things which we all know about. Next, please. So how far we've come. Double-edged swords. Every solution creates new problems. Next slide. Next, whatever. So every solution creates new problems. And so what we've done is we've moved from initially identity politics, which I was probably right into at the time, to now it's becoming more, well, business is taking it to a new level. And finally, part of that is a commodification. Both of these things, to me, actually taking it to a new level is great. Commodification is a double-edged sword, and I'm going to be moving on to that in a minute.
Oh, do you want to go on to it now? Sorry.
Go back here.
Yeah.
I think there's nothing else in there. So this is a bit of a read. So what's commodification? The process of turning something or someone into a commodity that can be bought and sold. And the positive things about it is, of course, that, hearing people talking about startups earlier, liberal democracy has unleashed more freedom to differ and thus more creativity and fulfillment than any other system that I know of. And this is the way we do things here. And much as, some of us would like a revolution and a return to more communitarian ways of doing things, that's just not going to happen. And so, in short, the foregrounding of neurodiversity as a positive creates even more pathways to creative activity and fulfillment than we dreamt of just 2 decades ago. And that is, in a large measure, well, it's due to both the processes I mentioned before. The negative of it is the exploitation, the dehumanization of the commodity, the people who've been parceled and packaged up into a nice little saleable package, the risk of a career losing sight of noble aims in the pursuit of profit, stereotyping. And then, inevitably there's going to be charlatans, and there needs to be regulation, I think, and there's going to be a fight there. So finally, the task of all of us in the business of selling neurodiversity for the common good, and of course, I am both a commodity in that and also a commodifier, and a commodifier of myself. The task of all of us in the business of selling neurodiversity for the common good is to stay on course via self-reflection and choice. Next slide. So, okay, did we miss one or? Never mind, I was going to just split them up because it's a lot to read. So also identity politics, also a double-edged sword. I guess everyone knows what it is. I'll just, I might as well read it. So it's a political approach where people from oppressed minorities form exclusive socio-political alliances, move away from broad-based or mainstream political coalitions, and demand to be treated as a protected class. And look, I've just been so stressed out. I'll have to give my sources later. I got most of it from Wikipedia, but I put in oppressed minorities, and the demand to be treated as a protected class is something that I read about in Bending Over Backwards, Leonard Davis, who has complexified and queried identity politics. So again, the positive is the first step of any political movement. And I should say that I get this mainly from Twitter, where identity politics is alive and kicking, and also very conflict, like there's lots of conflict there. So, but positively, it's the first step of any political movement, where we used to call it consciousness raising in the women's movement, where we all got together and discuss what we had in common and how we were oppressed and all the rest of it. And then, it converts the personal into the political, which is firstly a feminist concept, but it also comes from E. Wright Mills, sort of the father of sociology, or one of them, who says that something to the effect of that every personal problem is actually a public issue. So it raises consciousness, healing, solidarity. So the negatives, it tends to splinter into more and more subgroups. Proliferation of demands to be treated as a protective class create resentment and backlash. And the backlash is pretty fierce, particularly in these times where we're where we're moving away from liberal democracy, I guess. And the main thing about it is that people, not all, tend to forget intersectionality and the importance of looking at every issue within that analytical tool. Next slide. Oh my goodness, I think we missed one. Oh, well, no, the resolution. What was the resolution?
I think this is, they're slightly round the wrong way, but I think the main point, I think this is your main point, which is the commodification of neurodiversity, the process of turning something or someone into a commodity that can be bought and sold.
Thanks. So, yes. So I think, I don't know, should I give you a minute to read all that? There's quite a lot in there. Is it legible? I suppose it must be if I can read it.
So why don't I read it out for you? Give you a second to think.
Yeah, okay.
So, there's the commodifiers and the commodified. So in the commodifiers, there's institutional power, which are corporations and academia, many of whom are represented here at this conference. There's dominant cultural power from inherited wealth, connections, education, health and leisure. There's neuro-valued market capitalism, charismatic self-promoters, amoral neoliberal values, narcissists, psychopaths. There's employees and subcontractors, ordinary people needing to make a living. And then there's the commodified. There's the underclass, nothing to sell but their labour or their stories, which is a particularly
for me. Yeah. Yeah.
And then there's the disempowered minorities, the intersections within the neurodiversity movement. There's the neurominorities, that autistics are not themselves wired for self-promotion and don't automatically sell themselves. And then there's other neurodivergent groups whose sense of self-efficacy and self-esteem has been undermined through all of this modification process. Yeah.
And so they've been undermined through lack of education, self-esteem destroyed, and that is what we're hoping to change. And we are changing it. It's not going to happen overnight. So next slide. Well, so we live in a market can I use the big C word, capitalism, neoliberal ideology. We must all commodify or be commodified. But disabled people have often been excluded from the market. And this despite the fact that we all know that disabled people probably need more resources to live at an equitable, sustainable level than those who are not. So including us in the market has become a business opportunity, and selling us is about, I don't know whether I put this in a slide, but I should have. I mean, if you see how we're a business advantage, we're sold as an obedient workforce. Sometimes I have an image of, this is like my unconscious image that often rises to the surface when I hear this, is of just some male computer in a programmer in a darkened room with a chute that delivers pizza and Coca-Cola endlessly. And I think that's something that it does happen. I read a recent article about the exploitation of coders in the games industry. So that kind of thing is happening. So it's also becoming business with what I've called the academic commercial complex. In that sense, profit comes for academics or their institutions. Profit comes from the research process. That means I would say that data mining the stories of people with and academia is an aggregator of that, and the prestige accrues to them, the jobs accrue, and the question is, but what do the people who are being mined for our rich ore of stories get in return? So hopefully, and I must acknowledge the work of Rebecca Mallet and Catherine Runswick-Cole, who I believe are at Sheffield University, and their article, Commodifying Autism, the Cultural Contexts of Disability in the Academy. And I have to say that when I started thinking about this only 2 weeks ago, that, I feel commodified. Let's do something about the commodifying of neurodiversity. And I thought, I've come up with yet another new idea. And then I ran it by a friend of mine who is an academic, and she told me that the commodification of diversity is already a thing. So it's already, I suppose you could say, it's a commodity already. And again, this article here, Commodifying Autism, just gave me so many ahas that it was just wonderful. And I'm deriving some of that from here. So next slide.
I will. And, nowhere is that point more prescient to me than hearing the stories of young people who are autistic or come from communities of lived experience who are offered nothing to contribute to research designs. So when academic researchers are given £1 million worth of contracts to do studies, and then they reach out for stakeholder groups to represent ideas, and they're either paid $10 an hour or they're paid nothing for their advice. And there's a fairly well resourced advocate in the ether out there who I believe is also speaking at this conference at some point, who contributed to a very prestigious research project, disagreed with the direction it was taking, and not only did they not pay her for her contribution, they didn't listen to the disagreement that she had, didn't take it on board, and have still left her face and her name on their website as an indication that they've done due diligence to touching in with the community. So I just think this is a really, really important point, and I don't want to skimp on it. I think what you say here.
I won't. I am going on to that, and particularly in my story. And I did want to say, which I didn't put into a thing, that there's a name for this, which I don't think is a very good one, but it's commodity fetishism, which is the idea that we see the finished product, but we don't see the human and the work that goes into it. And in terms of academia, and we're all what's the word? We all work together. There's a lot of work that goes into this, and the work. Anyway, I'm going to talk about that in my bit. So, how can minorities be exploited in the world market? Let me count the ways. Well, we all know that. That's intersectionality, but the chief amongst these is class, because inequity and poverty are the greatest ills. It's the one evil ring that rules them all, I guess. Next slide. Next.
It's going. It's not going. There we go. There we go.
So this is so for a commodity, this is an afterthought. I just thought of it today or yesterday. For a commodity to be saleable, a desire must be met. I also got that from Runswick and Beckett. So what desires does neurodiversity meet? Next slide. Yeah. Sorry, I keep forgetting there is a delay between our countries. So
I think it's pretty awesome, really. You're in Sydney and it's the morning. I'm in the UK and it's the middle of the night. And we're broadcasting via California where it's afternoon. It's pretty amazing, really. Things are bouncing around all over the globe.
Yeah, it is amazing. And thank you so much for staying up. I think I should tell everyone that I was in despair last night. I just thought, I can't do this. And I knew that I should have started off doing it as a conversation. And everyone who knows me just intuitively gets that that's really what I'm better at. And Nancy, I kind of sent a desperate text to Nancy, and she immediately said that she would do it for me. And I'm so grateful. Thank you. So anyway, moving on. The neurodiversity.
By the way, you are just doing a presentation and we're not having a conversation. You're just doing an awesome job all by yourself. I'm just,
I know, but it makes it, I have to, the kind of mind I've got, I've just realized, some people talk about, that they're visual thinkers. I've just realized I'm a conversational thinker, and every thought I have is in conversation with someone. So to do it into the blank wall would have been impossible. Anyway, so thanks for coming. So if people want information, they want, help, and they want inclusion and all, and, I didn't make an exhaustive list. It was a last minute thing. And they want healing and some don't, or they want society to heal, the possibility of meaningful participation and a sustaining income, which, by the way, to me, does not necessarily mean the possession of paid work. And I think the notion that paid work, the possession of paid work is next to godliness, is a cultural trope, I suppose, that we just keep paying lip service to. And there's nothing in nature that says that. People are social animals. Even we are all interdependent. Whether this points to universal basic income, I won't go into those debates, and meaningful participation. I've spent a lot of my own life volunteering, which is what happens to you if you're the parent of a disabled child. And I found it really satisfying compared to all the horrible jobs that I've had, and so much more meaningful. So but also I think it feeds utopian longings for a perfectible society, which we must all strive for. And there's a kind of, particularly in the identity politics movement, there's a rainbows and sunshine aspect to it, which I find really quite unrealistic, and eventually not very helpful, because there's night and dark, there's night and day, and we have to, the neurodiversity movement, in my opinion, I didn't make a whole slide for this, but it has to become more realistic in a society that denies death, denies suffering, and there's a lot of problems that flow from this in the kind of society where everyone's busy commodifying themselves, basically making us look like we're full of rainbows and sunshine. I've got a good mind to punish you and turn the camera around so that you can see the rest of the room and what the conditions that I really live in. And but I've decided not to. And besides, most of you are probably in the same boat. So
let's do that in a minute. We need to wrap up, don't we? So we've got time for questions. So the question is it possible?
How much time have we got?
In order to do questions justice, we probably need to finish in the next 5 minutes or so. So,
okay, so we're nearly there.
We're nearly there. We've only got a few slides left. So, the question you're asking is it possible? And the thing I've heard you say before is that neurodiversity is not a Pollyanna concept. And this whole kind of theme of the double-edged sword, I think, is really important. And the theme of commodifying neurodiversity, making it something that somebody sells as a business advantage, making ourselves into something that we sell as expertise in this new paradigm of thought. But then it kind of comes back to, who is the commodifier and who is the commodified? And your next slide after is it possible is, how did payment get to be a dirty word? Okay, what are your thoughts on that?
That's actually, I think, I might not have changed that. That is really, the fact is that I really don't know. All I know is that when I started work in the 70s, if you went for a job and they advertised a job, the pay rates were always there, and they've gradually disappeared. And I ended up in the IT industry, and like a lot of people on the spectrum, and we were always on contract, and we were forbidden to tell people what we earned. Now, if you go to an interview, I think it's absolutely taboo to ask for to talk about and how much I'm going to get paid. Yet I was going to swear, for heaven's sake, that's a prime reason, isn't it? But you can't ask, that would be just, and then so it puts the onus on you and puts you on the back foot, and you've got to struggle through the whole interview wondering when they're going to tell you, if at all. And so can you just quickly show me the next slide?
Well, the next one is this, and then we've got this symbol here.
Okay, so I'll just talk to the whole thing at once. So in my experience, some of the things that happen is I got an offer for another conference from another university, major university, and they began with, "It's such a big honor. It would be such a big honor to have you, and we'd like to pay you a small honorarium." Big honor, small honorarium. I kind of had to laugh to myself about what that meant. But I thought, well, at least they offered, that doesn't often happen. Then I've been approached by some one major multinational entrant into the Australian market who asked me if I would like to be on the board, or one of their, not necessarily officially, but unofficially. And so I said, well, do you pay board members? No, we don't do that. And I think, for a multinational company, I'm living in poverty, excuse me.
And I think it's particularly pertinent when so many of the ideas that we use in the neurodiversity movement started with your work, that there's this sort of sense of expecting you to turn up for free. And this other one that you've written about pick your brains over a cuppa, I get this all the time. I get this question all the time. People just reach out to me on LinkedIn. "Oh, I love your work. It's really interesting. Can I pick your brains over a cuppa?" I'm like, you know what? I would really like to have time to have a cup of tea with my husband, let alone somebody who I actually don't know, who may or may not have anything worth following up with. So there's kind of this sense of, if you're particularly female, I think, if you're female and you work in an industry which is about equality or helping people or making things better, that you are somehow expected to give of yourselves for free, and you are expected to share your expertise. And that doesn't seem to be matched with the era of commodification that we're in, does it really?
And if you do raise the issue, it sounds, again, you're really on the back foot. I think particularly with me, I mean, people are prepared to pay for psychologists, but they're not prepared to, like, sociology takes almost as long to become as it does to become a psychologist. And to me, psychology and sociology can never live apart from each other.
Okay.
And yet it's just simply not considered a thing. And of course, nobody says, thank God the sociologist is here. So,
I do. I say that all the time.
You're the only one. That's why you're my best friend.
No.
Anyway, let's move on.
Yeah, I say that all the time, because I think it's impossible to think of the experience of the human without the context that they're in, and that's what we're trying to, that's what we were trying to do with the medical model of autism and ADHD. We were trying to think of the individual without thinking of the context, but without the context.
And I think we're realising that now. I think what's happened is that the medical and social, social model extremism ended a long time ago. I mean, I already criticised it in my thesis, if you read it, quite heavily. And I think both have come together, and that is what we're hoping for, a synthesis, back to that dialectical process. I'm just going to finish this quickly because you're telling me we're running out of time. So business as usual. So I thought of this, and what this playing musical deck chairs on the Titanic. And what I mean by that is employment is is it a zero-sum game in which if a neurodivergent person gets a job, then someone else misses out. And in the context of we just don't know where our economy is going. Is it going to collapse? The jobs going to get more? Are they going to be less? And so and if that happens, if we're playing musical deck chairs, then people with neurodivergent people are going to be hated. There's going to be a huge backlash, and we have to think about that.
So collapse.
We have seen that in other areas of D&I. You know, I think the one of the things this movement has missed is the D&I overlap, the diversity and inclusion overlap. It's like we've grown up within disability, and actually, if we look to diversity and inclusion in terms of HR, in terms of policy, in terms of politics, some of those movements are a bit further ahead. And one of the things we can definitely say is that there is a backlash. If you create opportunities for minority access, you get a backlash from the majority. Yeah,
we saw it with equal opportunity, but it doesn't mean we shouldn't keep pursuing it by any means.
Mm-hmm.
That's the point. So the point is, I guess, is that we've actually got to, grow meaningful work and create meaningful roles, but they shouldn't necessarily, and there should be a minimum sort of age living, but not. But I think you jumped ahead a bit too quickly. But
I did. Sorry, I leaned on the.
That's all right.
In my defence, it is nearly 1:30 in the morning, and I got up at 5:30 today.
When I woke up this morning, 1:30 in the morning, but I reckon I'm just pure adrenaline.
Neurodiversity and insomnia go together like roast chicken and gravy.
To go back. So anyway, so what's going to happen next? I think, it's a possibility that we're going to collapse, and it's going to be, will it be a catastrophe or will it be an opportunity, danger, opportunity, that kind of thing? Well, let's hope, that there's going to be decentralization, which will return a lot more roles to people from what's been happening with the, with monopoly. Anyway, what I'm talking about, monopoly capitalism. And finally, in plain English, the ideal future, there's nothing really new about neurodiversity except that it so encapsulates the times. But we've always known that the goal an ideal society strives towards is to expect from each according to their ability, to each and to give to each according to their need. I mean, this is never going to be fully realized, but it's the goal that we all strive for. And the next one is from a French philosopher, Simone Weil. And a friend of mine told me this 20 years ago, and it just resonated with me, but I didn't have the slightest idea why. And just last year, I suddenly remembered it. And I think it is neurodiversity in a nutshell. Every being cries out silently to be read differently. Do not be deaf to their cry. And that is all I have to say.
Hi, thank you. Thank you for your talk today. I would like to just let you know that there is love sent and hellos in the Q&A. So people were very happy to see your presentation. A lot of people have thanked you. Thank you for the conversation and for your presentation today here. So wanted to let you know that lots of positives in the Q&A.
Considering that I was at an all-time low last night and thought, I can't do this. But that was great. And maybe if Nancy hadn't got on, I might not even have. So thank you, everybody.
Well, I'm glad that you did. And there are a few questions. We had a couple questions as you were talking about the research and subjects not being paid. And some were comments and some were questions about that. And was wondering if you had any further thoughts on what should happen going forward or how that might be addressed.
Well, I think I did have. I know that I made a slide at the last minute, and maybe Nancy didn't get it because I actually did address that. And so basically, what I was thinking is that it depends on. Well, first of all, who's doing the research? Is it corporate or is it academic? And academic research is supposedly or mostly without fear or favour and independent. Corporate research is often biased. Academic research, academia is under attack from the right and is underfunded. So I don't really, I mean, this is something for someone to research, because some institutions probably have more than others. I don't know. So generally, I would say that if this is what I did in my thesis, because, well, I actually wrote a satirical piece as well about being researched. But what I decided to do because basically mine was participant observation of Martijn Decker's e-group, which had the most wonderful people, articulate people on it, and really kind of doing a lot of the pioneering work of explaining who we were to ourselves. And I just thought, look, some of these people deserve to be recognized. Like, if you make a killer comment, then I think what researchers need to do is ask people, would you prefer to be anonymous? Would you prefer for me to make up a name that at least shows your gender or ethnicity, or would you prefer to be acknowledged? And that's exactly what I did. And it worked. I think only one or maybe two people wanted to be acknowledged. The rest of them were happy to have a name made up for them. So that's one thing you can do. Payment, well, it depends on how much fun. Yeah, it's awkward. And also there's the whole question of well, and government. I forgot government. So what happened was that because I live in social housing, I kind of rose in the ranks and was sort of public tenant number one for a while, in the sense that I was on the major committee and I did an enormous amount for nothing. And I eventually ended up forcing them to give us all sitting fees for that. But, the objection that was raised was, well, if we let then we'd have to have elections, and, we'd have to do this and who knows what we would get. And I'm thinking, well, that's right. We're part of human society. And if it's an important position, yes, there should be elections, and yes, there should be payment. And yes, that's going to get a better, I don't know. And then again, of course, then other people will be excluded. Okay, so it's a big too hard to answer in one. And so for corporations, well, a lot of them do market research. And so generally they pay you with a voucher, which is for low-income people. I know a lot of us, I haven't done it for a very long time, maybe I should, is, we just put our names down everywhere and say we've never been anywhere, and then we get to go get $30 or something like that for something. The people do that. So that's good. And the reason, of course, if you do it that way, then people on low incomes, including myself, because I live in public housing and because I'm a pensioner, anything I earn, I'm really not in it for the money, because anything I earn immediately impacts everything else that I earn. I mean, cuts my pension, raises my rent. So those kind of under the table things are quite good. So yeah, it's too complex, and it depends on what the research is for, so on.
Yeah. Well, you touched on a lot of pieces of it, but you're right. That's an incredibly complex issue in terms of what to do about research and research subjects and that feeling of exploitation. So, but you hit on quite a bit.
I just want to say, at the very least, I don't know how many projects I've been on, and they have, the ethics committee sign them on, and at least they can sort of send us the results of the research. But, half the time we never hear from them again, and the research ends up in the clouds in some expensive journal that we'll never be able to afford to even look at. So, at least do what you said you were going to do. That's a basic.
Well, thank you. We are, I think, at the end of our time today. So I'm going to turn it back to Dr. Fung. But thank you for sharing your thoughts on that today.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Judy. Your start of the neurodiversity movement is really changing the trajectory of a lot of us. So we all thank you for doing your seminal work. And thank you, Nancy, for supporting Judy. And tomorrow morning, we'll hear Nancy's keynote presentation. So.